Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is January 2nd, 2017. This is going to be the first broadcast of 2017. So we've left quite a rough year behind us. There are reasons to be optimistic for 2017. There are reasons to be pessimistic also, and we'll try to wade through some of those. Of course, tonight I want to talk about the Syrian situation as usual and go through some of the misinformation and disinformation coming from the mainstream corporate media regarding that. I also want to talk about the Russian hacking scandal. In addition, we need to talk about a plan for 2017, and this is because there's a new administration taking over, and we're getting a number of new representatives, senators, etc., and we need to talk about our demands and our plan of action. So we'll try to get into that as best we can and talk about that throughout the show. Now, for those of you who are just joining us for the first time tonight, I'd like to encourage you to catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's when the new program airs, and the show is rebroadcast throughout the week on ucy.tv. The show's also being posted and archived at Activist Post now at the podcast section. And, of course, you can find all the archives of the show at my website, brandonturbeville.com. Now, if you are a new listener, you want to keep track of my work, then activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, arrowofwisdom.org, and again, my website, brandonturbeville.com. That's the website where I repost all of my information, all of the articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the interviews, all of the relevant information is there. The social media links, the free book, all of it is at brandonturbeville.com. So please check back to that website on a regular basis. And the site is growing by leaps and bounds, especially ever since we rebuilt the site. We're going to be making some more additions to it soon, and I want you to be a part of that. So let's talk about what is happening in Syria first. I want to get over to the Syrian situation, and then I want to get to the domestic situation and talk about that. Now, the mainstream media has been absolutely insane over the last couple of months, especially, not just with the election, but in the wake of the election. The media has gone absolutely insane, particularly the left. And the left is perhaps, well, not perhaps, the left is acting in a way that's more frightening even than the right, despite the fact that the right has won a presidential election. So the twilight zone of 2016 has residual effects. Now, let's look at some of the propaganda coming from the mainstream. And of course, it's not only been ridiculous here domestically, but in terms of foreign affairs, whether it's Syria or Russia, and now Ukraine, the crypt keeper, John McCain, is now speaking out in support of Kiev again, the Kiev fascists. Now, we're not surprised that John McCain is supporting fascists, Nazis, etc. We're not surprised that John McCain is in favor of a color revolution. We're not surprised that John McCain is yet again dipping his hands in blood. We're just surprised at the ability of this old fart to be able to do so. We'll talk more about McCain later. But in terms of Syria, we had about mid-December reports coming from the mainstream media regarding the liberation of Aleppo, which they were describing as being the fall of Aleppo. And it's easy to see how the corporate media is becoming more and more irrelevant by the day. You only need to look at the coverage of the liberation of Aleppo to see why the mainstream media has to rely on government legislation and constant hysteria and panic and idiocy from the general public to stay afloat, because we're not going to try to provide a wide range of samples of stupidity here or lunacy that's being peddled by the corporate press. We have one article that stands out. It's Aleppo, Ceasefire Reached in Besieged Syrian City, Rebels Say, by Alistair Jameson and Mac William Bishop. This article is what I want to focus on. It's NBC, so try to contain your shock. But it is a stunning display of unsupported and distorted information. This article repeatedly claims that Assad's forces are focused on murdering innocent civilians, hunting them down in the streets and killing them, burning them alive. It's even suggesting that many civilians are committing mass suicide because of the Syrian military's victory. The article constantly conflates terrorists with civilians. It's nothing but unverified claims presented as absolute truth, and it's unverified from the first word to the very last. Let me read you a selection. A ceasefire agreement has been reached that would allow civilians and fighters trapped in the besieged Syrian city of Aleppo to evacuate, NBC confirmed Tuesday. 5 buses will head into the enclave in the eastern section of the city to pick up the survivors around 5 a.m. Wednesday local time, a source said. It was not immediately clear what weapons the remaining rebel fighters will be allowed to take with them, they said. There was no immediate confirmation of the agreement from the Syrian government, which has been waging a brutal campaign to recapture what was once the country's biggest city and which is now in ruins. Eastern Aleppo has become a bloody graveyard for thousands of innocent people, said David Miliband of the International Rescue Committee. David Miliband is now in the IRC. Now, it's funny. They said 5 buses are heading into Aleppo, right? At the time, the mainstream media is saying that hundreds of thousands, or at least 100,000 civilians, were trapped in the city, being about to be killed by the Assad government. So the question is, if there's 100,000 civilians in the city, why only 5 buses? It must be really big buses if only 5 of them are going to bring out 100,000 people. So let's continue and read more of this selection. The development came after dozens of civilians were killed by Syrian forces in what the United Nations described as a complete meltdown of humanity during the final battle for Aleppo, citing accounts of women and children being burned alive and of families choosing suicide over surrender. How would families, if they're innocent, how would civilians surrender? Anyway, the UN Human Rights Office said it received reports of pro-government forces killing at least 82 people as they tightened their grip on the city. Rupert Colville, spokesman of the UN Human Rights Office, said before the agreement was announced that he feared retribution against thousands of civilians still holed up in a hellish corner smaller than 1 square mile. 11 women and 13 children were among those killed in 4 different neighborhoods late Monday, Colville told a news briefing, adding that there could be many more. The reports we had are of people being shot in the street trying to flee and shot in their homes. Jens Lurke, the UN humanitarian spokesman, said that it looked like a complete meltdown of humanity in Aleppo. UN agency UNICEF said many children, possibly more than 100, unaccompanied or separated from their families, are trapped in a building under heavy attack in East Aleppo, citing reports from a doctor on the scene. Again, we were told there were no doctors in Aleppo. So what happened to that last doctor in Aleppo? Well, they're all gone, but they've got a source in Aleppo now, who's a doctor, of course. Arab media reported that scores of civilians were burned alive by regime forces. Really? Although this was not confirmed by observers at the Aleppo Media Center or the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. In other words, 2 organizations that are lapdogs for terrorists, that have supported terrorists tooth and nail since the very beginning of this crisis, can't even confirm this BS that's coming that came from the mainstream media. Civilians being burned alive by regime forces. All right, so Charles Lister, a Syria expert and senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, said that there were truly shocking stories from Aleppo, including husbands and wives taking each other's lives and family suicides, and that hundreds may have died during Monday's fighting. End quote. What kind of person do you think that sounds like? So, despite the fact here that we have most civilians having been evacuated prior to the siege, either by agreements between the Syrian and Russian forces and the terrorists who were trying to angle for more breathing room, or just simply because of the nature of the massive civilian flight to government areas, as the terrorists took over and maintained control of East Aleppo, the corporate press attempted to paint a picture of a teeming East Aleppo under a brutal, indiscriminate siege by government troops. Civilians were no doubt caught in the crossfire, but the Western press would claim that all of the people who were injured or killed were intentionally murdered by Syrian forces, which is a tragic lie, since not once has the Syrian army been shown to have intentionally targeted civilians. On the other hand, America's terrorists have made torture, rape, murder of innocent people, all of it's a regular occurrence, and it's proven by their own video footage, which you can find on YouTube. So the UN representatives never explained why these alleged innocent civilians would face retribution from the Syrian government. What do they have to be afraid of? Unless the innocent civilians were in fact guilty terrorists, which is a possibility that becomes greater as you read through the article. So the article also, neither the article or the UN, by the way, explain why civilians who are allegedly targets of the brutal Assad regime flee to government-held areas every time terrorists manage to take over a city or area in the country. So let me read another selection. This is a longer selection, but I'm only doing this. I'm only giving this airtime because I want to take it apart piece by piece and show you exactly what the average American is being subjected to, and this is what we're up against. Trapped activists, and activists, of course, trapped terrorists, posted farewell messages on social media saying they were waiting for death or captivity while others fled to government-held areas. And I should add, we hope they got their death or captivity. Most of them did. As the front lines shifted, thousands carried what possessions they could, some pushing relatives in wheelchairs before a heavy overnight rainstorm. Celebrations on the government-held side of the divided city lasted long into the night, with a Reuters witness describing bullets dropping like rainfall as fighters shot into the air in triumph. You heard that. That's even the mainstream, right? Celebrations on the government-held side. The Red Cross on Tuesday warned of a deepening humanitarian catastrophe and said further loss of life can be averted only if the basic rules of warfare and of humanity are applied. Now, the article doesn't say whether or not the Red Cross asked for more money, but I'm sure they did. And it said in a statement, thousands of civilians' lives are in danger as the battle reaches new peaks and the area is plunged into chaos. Thousands with no part in the violence have literally nowhere safe to run, end quote. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who is no longer UN Secretary General, said he was alarmed over reports of atrocities against a large number of civilians, but stressed the UN was not able to independently verify these reports. Ismail Al-Abdullah, a volunteer with the White Helmets terrorist support group, spoke to NBC News from Aleppo. He said bombing was so fierce the volunteer group was unable to carry out rescue missions. Well, they're volunteers, all right. And they're unable to carry out rescue missions because they don't know how. All they know how to do is create destructions. I won't go into the history of the White Helmets and what they are, but needless to say, they're a terrorist support group. And if you don't believe me, go to my website, type in White Helmets in the search bar, and you'll get plenty of information. In an emotional Skype interview, Mr. Al-Abdullah said, "All the world let us down. Even they can't protect our volunteers or protect the civilians, so we can't carry out our missions. We're not scared of bombing anymore. All we're scared of is Assad's forces more than ever. Me and everyone, even the white helmets." Well, we surely hope that he managed to kill the white helmets when his forces entered eastern Aleppo as well. No sympathy for terrorists here. In the rebel area, photographer Amin al-Halabi posted what he described as a last letter on Facebook. "I'm waiting for death or captivity by the Assad regime," he wrote, saying that to die victorious on earth is better than despair. On earth dust is better than despair. Please forgive me and pray for forgiveness and remember me well. We certainly hope he didn't have to wait long for his death or captivity. Twitter user Mr. Alhamdo, who said he's an Aleppo resident, posted a video update saying farewell to his followers. "I don't believe anymore in the UN, don't believe anymore in the international community. Russia doesn't want us to go out alive, they want us dead. Assad is the same." Well, yeah, that's true. It's funny though. Let me read the rest of his quote. "But yesterday there are many celebrations on the other part of Aleppo. They were celebrating on our bodies." Your bodies were in East Aleppo, not West. "It's okay, this is life, but at least we know that we are a free people. We wanted freedom. This world doesn't like freedom, it seems. Don't believe that you are free people in your countries anymore." Well, okay, that latter part is actually true, but freedom, of course, is not brought with the Quran and the beards and the head lice that these monkeys tend to bring, and the religious authoritarian dictatorships that they like to bring with Saudi money and U.S. weaponry and CIA direction. Another user, Mother Intaki, posted, "I would like to thank all the humans who stood with our cause. I will never forget you if we pass to the other life." Well, it's we could make fun of this for hours if we wanted to. I'd like to thank all the humans. Apparently there were animals standing with them as well. I guess the goat lovers of the Al-Nusra Front fighters or something. Maybe that's what Mandar Antaki is responding to. None of the accounts could be independently verified by NBC News. Syria's military says the claims of atrocities are a desperate attempt by rebel forces to gain international sympathy. So we give you all of these sources, all these reports, but they can't be independently verified. But we will report them as if they're verified. In other words, NBC. It's funny also that terrorists can have Twitter accounts that they continue to update that are constantly being updated. But yet other people, for posting things that aren't politically correct, aren't necessarily worshiping the right gender identity on the proper day or the right racial group or minority or whatever, they get shut down immediately. People who question the official Syrian official narrative on Syria, for instance, on other social media outlets, get shut down on Facebook quickly, very quickly. But terrorists, their accounts are fine. Now, that same article has a picture of civilians in West Aleppo, in the government-held area, cheering and celebrating the Syrian military's victory in East Aleppo. So this is the question you have to ask. Why would civilians in West Aleppo cheer for Assad while civilians in East Aleppo commit mass suicide? This is the same city, right? Just an arbitrary line that is cutting down the middle of it. And people on the west cheer, fire guns in the air. People in the east commit mass suicide. Is the city truly that divided? What on earth would have made people living in the same city see things so differently on such a massive scale that again, it's just an arbitrary line going through the middle of the city? But not only that, you got to pay attention to the individuals presented as the victims of this brutal Assad regime, right? Activists, white helmets, they quickly take the place of civilians in the articles if they're one and the same. They make them seem like they're hippie protesters for peace or selfless humanitarian volunteers. But as we've documented in the past, activists means terrorists, and white helmets are a terrorist support group, if not a terrorist group themselves. And then, of course, we had we had a real gem. The Banana Republic of Europe, France, is called for an investigation into these alleged atrocities. We had, according to the same article, France called for an investigation into the alleged atrocities, warning Russia that it risks being complicit in acts of vengeance and terror. We had Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault saying the backers of the regime, starting with Russia, cannot allow this logic of vengeance and terror without taking the risk of being complicit. He also said we cannot let these crimes remain unpunished. Earlier, UN humanitarian advisor on Syria, Jan Egeland, said that Syria and Russia were accountable for any and all atrocities that the victorious militias in Aleppo are now committing. So, according to Ayrault, killing terrorists and defeating terrorist organizations is just sour grapes. Right? Fighting back against French-assisted proxy soldiers is just vengeance and, ironically, terror. Likewise, we have Jan Egeland, with no evidence that the Syrian military is committing atrocities, labeled Russia as responsible for them. Now, this is investigative skill of enormous caliber, right? That doesn't bode well for any investigation forthcoming, declaring the Russians guilty of a crime that hasn't even been determined to have actually happened. That's either an act of sorcery or political deception. Now, the Western corporate media and the Western governments that this media speaks for have discredited themselves further and further by the day. The level of claims that are ranging from the Russians did it, whatever it might be, fake news, mass suicides in Aleppo, it's become so absurd that either the audience consuming this crap will finally descend into madness or just realize that the corporate media has been lying to them all along. So I've included in some of my articles videos of the Syrians celebrating the government liberation of East Aleppo in East Aleppo. So you can see for yourself that the corporate media is lying to you. Now, I want to get into some solutions and demands in a minute, but since it's 2017, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. I want to mention, before we move on, we have to give out our end-of-year awards, right? I've got an article out. 7 times the mainstream media got its ass kicked in debates in 2016. And it seems like any time one of our competent real media, alt media activists get involved in a debate, the mainstream media does get its ass kicked. And of course, we have to let's work our way back. We have we'll go back from number 7, right? We have to give position number 7 to David Icke for calmly ripping apart the propaganda of Andrew Neil, Liz Kendall, and Michael Portillo on the BBC. Icke's not known for his confrontational interviews, but in this clip, which you can find on my website, he just calmly walked through all of Neil's attempts at making what he's considering conspiracies look ridiculous. And each time Neil throws out a snide question, Icke manages to avoid the minefield and bring out a staggering amount of truth within the time that he's allowed to speak. The program concludes with Andrew Neil saying that in his lifetime, everything has always been investigated and has turned out all right. Right, Neil? Everything's fine. Nothing to worry about. And that was evident. We also have number 6, Eva Bartlett, dealing strongly with Dili Hussein. He's a terrorist supporter based in the UK. We have to give Dili credit. He's been Eva's most formidable opponent in a debate, but it only took 3 minutes into the program before he started screaming that Eva was a Russian agent and a conspiracy theorist. He did his best to overtalk her and shout down Eva before she managed to firmly silence him. Now, while we are aware that Dili and his ilk are not accustomed to having women speaking, we nonetheless have to point out that he kept his mouth shut after he was dealt with. Every time he opened his mouth, he tried to put as much propaganda and rhetoric out there as he could. But Bartlett followed behind him and completely eviscerated his foolishness and called him out on what she called his Zionist strategy. He managed to insult the RT host into a debate over whether or not the RT host was pushing Russian propaganda. It was a valiant effort on the part of Dilly Hussein, but ultimately it was a slow burn and crash at the end. Toward the end of the program, he's left looking like a little schoolyard bully who just got his ass kicked in front of the class, and he's just waiting for it to be over so he can go home and cry to mommy. Number 5, we have Vanessa Beeley and Daniel McAdams debating Brent Badowski in an RT debate. Right, Brent Badowski has been making the rounds for a few years. The reptilian guy there, it looks like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. He's been doing this for a few years now, promoting the war in Syria. Now that the word has come down the pike to attack the Russians, he's doing that also. And he was debating Vanessa Beeley, who has actually traveled to Syria a number of times and has personal eyewitness testimony regarding the situation on the ground. He could only rely on rhetoric and shouting to stay in the debate, and we had Beeley and McAdams. They could rest assured they won the debate when Badowski started yelling, "Dead Syrian civilians, dead babies," all the top of his lungs, over and over again. Finally asking Beeley if she'd ever interviewed any of the dead Syrian babies that he claimed Assad killed. I'm not really exactly sure how anybody could interview a dead baby, but we are sure that Beeley won that debate. We got to give number 4 to Jesse Ventura, defending Gary Johnson, opposing the drug war, praising Putin on Yahoo News. We couldn't have a list like this without Jesse Ventura on it. The host was obviously pushing an anti-Russia propaganda line. She was attempting to push this on Ventura, which was a bad idea. The only thing about bad about Jesse's interviews with the mainstream clowns is that there aren't enough of these interviews anymore. We hope he gets some more interviews. Now, number 3, Eva Bartlett again destroying a mainstream pundit on RT that we have. I wouldn't call RT mainstream media, but the debate is most certainly mainstream. Right? We have Stephen Zunes of the University of San Francisco as he was debating Eva Bartlett and historian Gareth Porter. Early on in the debate, Zunes began reciting his apparent training that there are many moderate terrorists and that the Syrian military was responsible for untold amounts of dead civilians. And thankfully, Eva jumps in shortly after and dumps a bucket of cold water on Zunes' regurgitation of State Department propaganda. And after only a few moments of the debate with her, Zunes becomes more and more frustrated and visibly irate, making gestures, bouncing back and forth. Really looks like the Joker or something. So you can check that out. Of course, number 2, David Icke clashing with the obnoxious, childish Today Show hosts in Australia. Australians, of course, the new Americans in terms of behavior like this. Ike's generally pretty gracious and patient with mainstream journalists who have abused him and ridiculed him and mocked him over the years and take out what he says out of context and try to use it against him later. But after, I guess, years of mainstream stupidity, he seems to come out ready to fight during this last string of interviews. And the interview is on the place on the list because, one, Ike brings the ignorance of the host full circle at the end of the program because he asked them about Iraq, which it's a perfect ending to the debate. And 2, because the guy, I don't remember his name, but he was so obviously obnoxious that if all Ike had to do really was say nothing, and the Today Show would have been revealed for being the daily dose of brain-killing entertainment that it is, with the adult children, the 200-pound toddlers for hosts. And of course, number 1, our top award, the Alt Media Journalist of the Year award, goes to Eva Bartlett for the destruction of this mainstream journalist. Eva has spent a number of months on the ground in Syria. She's traveled all across the country, and specifically Aleppo. She's finally returned to the Western world with another round of first-hand knowledge of the Syrian crisis. She's traveled to Syria a number of times. Each time she's carried back a story that's been widely different from that's peddled on the mainstream corporate press here in the NATO countries. And after she left Syria, she took part in a press conference that was organized by the Syrian mission to the United Nations, gave a brief statement about what she observed in Syria and how she's aware firsthand of the Western media's deception in terms of coverage of the crisis. But she was questioned by a Norwegian journalist, Christopher Rothenberg, who challenged her claims that the Western media was lying. He said, "How can you call us liars?" And, well, he knows full well how she can call them liars now, because in an exchange that lasted about 2 minutes, he and the rest of the mainstream corporate media was absolutely humiliated and destroyed. It's a classic interview that will be will live in fame, not infamy, but fame. Infamy from the mainstream perspective. It really put a damper on the propagandists. Now, if I think we have time, I want to, we should also, before I came up with that list, I wish I had had the chance to see Mr. Caleb Maupin, who was, he was part of the White House press conference. Well, he's a part of the conference, but he's a journalist who is attending the press conferences, the State Department. And John Kirby was the individual giving the press conference. And what happened was that Maupin asked Kirby about these lies that people were not celebrating the liberation of Aleppo. Kirby says, I haven't seen anybody. Kirby, by the way, is a notorious narcissist. This guy is just dripping with narcissism. He is yet another embarrassment for somebody who gets regularly humiliated and who is unable to answer even the most basic questions. This guy has it's malignant narcissism. But Caleb asked him, how could he make this comment when there's plenty of video evidence that the people are indeed celebrating in Aleppo. He also called Kirby's claims into question about the reputable outlets like CNN, which either relied on Twitter accounts of terrorists, for one thing, and Kirby responded with his typical narcissistic arrogance, challenging Maupin back, right? He says, I don't know where you're getting your sources or what you have in your reliability of your sources, but this is what we have. And he said, maybe you could present me with some of that evidence. Well, he didn't quite count on the fact that Maupin was indeed ready to present the evidence. This is something that the State Department isn't used to, presenting evidence. They're used to just making claims like Russians hacked us. If there's any technical difficulties tonight, ladies and gentlemen, it is, of course, because the Russians are hacking us. Putin himself is sitting in his boxers with a bag of Cheetos trying to hack into UCY. Oh, wait, that's right. I'm on the wrong propaganda line. UCY is Russian propaganda, so I'm sure he's got a bag of Cheetos in his boxers and he's trying to hack into Lena Dunham's Twitter account or something like that. But anyway, watch the video. Kirby is humiliated, and Caleb Maupin actually produces photographs right there in the State Department briefing and disproves Kirby's stupid statements right to his face, and all Kirby has to do then is step back, and he's forced to admit that people have to decide for themselves what they're going to find credible and what they're not going to find credible. Well, obviously not, because you said CNN was credible and other ones weren't. So that's yet another ass-kicking by our alt-media journalists. So we hope we get more opportunities to do that in the future. Any opportunity that we have is gold. Now, let's talk about the Russian hacking, since we've made a couple of jokes about that already, because this is now the line that is coming mainly from the left. Okay, Hillary Clinton, whatever Hillary Clinton does, it's always of course someone else's fault. Hillary is unable to have dirt stick to her. She lost the election because the Russians hacked American elections, not because she's a psychopath, not because she has the personality of the Wicked Witch of the West and the Wizard of Oz, not because she's drooping with evil, not because she's murdered indirectly millions of people and possibly directly, not because she's voted with, for, and in collusion with Wall Street every single time, not because she's anti-gun, anti-black, pro-drug war, not because she's a shrieking, vile woman, shrieking, vile person. It's because the Russians hacked the elections. I don't even know where to go after that. This is so retarded. It's if you look back, in only a year, it's the leftists now who are harping about the Russians. We've gone full circle. Now it's and when I say leftists, I don't mean real leftists. I mean basically Democrats. If you're a Hillary Clinton supporter, you are not a liberal. You are a Democrat, and also an idiot. But you're definitely not a liberal. So we have that, and Hillary is now blaming the Russians. The Democrats are now the McCarthyites, right? If anything is coming out of the alternative press that the Democrats don't like, it's the Russians. It's the scary Russians. If only Castro was still alive, for our dear Democrats to blame things on Castro. Perhaps they could do that as well. But now it's Russians and Assad. I guess Assad is going to be the number 2. He'll be the new Castro. For the leftists, I should quit calling them the leftists. For the Democrats, so all of that is where we're at now. Now, what we have is the framing of the narrative, though, because you get these neocon, right-wing, and I don't want to call these people conservatives because they're not conservatives. They're just Wall Street hacks with some religious fanaticism thrown in for cover to pull on the attention of low-information voters. So these Republican hacks are now coming out and saying, well, Putin did us a favor by keeping Hillary Clinton out. Well, that's framing the narrative, right? Because it's saying, yes, Hillary Clinton's an evil psychopath, but it's essentially saying that Russia did hack American elections, and we're thankful for that. Now, we'll say if Russia hacked our American elections, they didn't. There's no evidence of it. But if they did, we would condemn that. We don't want American elections being dictated by foreign powers. That's just something we can't tolerate, even if they make a better decision. But we can't. We couldn't tolerate that. But there's no evidence for it. But yet we have the Republican clowns coming out and saying, well, we're thankful that Putin did this. Well, let's take a look at it. We've had claims that Russia has hacked American elections, and it's been coming out from the president. Good riddance to him in 2017. We hope the door hits him on the way out hard. High-level politicians have been saying the same thing, and the corporate media, ever since shortly after, not just the Trump victory, but in the wake of Clinton's treachery being unearthed by WikiLeaks in the months prior to that, maybe around June, partial amounts of treachery. I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but ladies and gentlemen, I wrote a book to prevent that evil witch from even getting the nomination of the Democratic Party. I had to stop, not because I ran out of material, but because the book was getting too big, and I needed to finish the book to get it out in time. I would still be writing it if I was trying to be comprehensive in regards to Hillary Clinton's treachery. There's literally no end to this. But the claims are allegedly supported by U.S. intelligence agencies. They're being circulated minute by minute by the corporate media. If you take a look at CNN, between entertainers, half-clothed entertainers, sports, which I believe may be the longest section of the media now, And you'll see Putin's face, you'll see Trump's face, you'll see Clinton, Assad, Putin, Trump, Clinton, Assad, right? Of course, Clinton's the only victim. She's the victim in the whole affair, because the Clinton News Network has to present her as the victim of everything. Poor Hillary. Trump is the beneficiary, and Putin is the perpetrator, of course, according to CNN. So let's clear a few things up, right? The claim is that Russia hacked American elections to keep Hillary Clinton from being president and to put Trump in. Well, the U.S. government was not hacked. Let's be clear. The voting machines were not hacked. This is a point of intense misinformation by the corporate media. The tagline is that Russia hacked U.S. elections. This is typical, uninformed, half attentive viewers are going to be left with the idea that the Russians hacked into the voting machines or somehow disturbed the American voting choice. With the rhetoric coming from the government and the media, you're also led to believe by inference alone, that Russia hacked the government in a way. But the truth is that regardless of who the hackers were, neither the government nor the vote was ever hacked. Only the DNC was hacked. In other words, the Democratic Party was the only victim of hacking in this sequence of events. The information that was contained in those emails were released to WikiLeaks, which in turn released them to the public. Now, it was through intense work and effort that the alternative media was able to bring this material contained in the DNC emails to light, because the mainstream media, of course, were not going to touch it. In fact, they even told you that if you went to WikiLeaks and read the emails, it was a federal crime. That's what they actually said on, I believe, CNN. So, what about the interference claims that the Russians interfere with American elections? This centers around the claims that Russian hackers obtained secret information about Hillary's shady deals with the DNC and the corporate media, as well as her bizarre sexual, occult, satanic rituals, and then shared it all to WikiLeaks and the press to the detriment of the Clinton campaign, and then causing Donald Trump to be elected. Now, we'll talk about the alleged Russian connections later. But for this issue, there was collusion between Clinton's team and the press. There was collusion between Clinton's team and the DNC, and there were bizarre satanic rituals, spirit cooking rituals with the Podestas and Abramovich. None of that information was false. So what we are having is Clinton and Obama and the U.S. government and the corporate media. They're arguing that the skeletons should have stayed in the closet, or at least until after the elections, when it became too late to matter. They're arguing in favor of secrecy. They're arguing against transparency. Now that is the legacy of Obama, and of course that is the lifestyle of Clinton. But you can't ignore the fact that the emails and the communications were all very legitimate. Had Clinton and her team not acted inappropriately, there never would have been an issue to begin with. And after all, remember, back when the Patriot Act was being debated, its supporters, which Hillary Clinton was one of those, by the way, the supporters argued that if we had nothing to hide, we had nothing to fear. Well, clearly, Clinton's team had something to fear. Now, this issue of Grisly Step, I also wanted to point this out. The corporate media is loyally regurgitating everything the White House and the intelligence community produces. That's because the intelligence community essentially runs the corporate media. And they're doing this by inference, basically. They're claiming that the name of this hacking job, the code name, the operation name, was Grisly Step. And if you read many of these outlets, it sounds like that is the name that the Russians gave the hacking operation, like it was an intelligence operation. But Grisly Step is not a name that was given to it by anybody but the U.S. intelligence community. That is what the U.S. intelligence community is calling the hacks. It is an American name, Grisly Step. There's nothing Russian about it. So, who hacked the DNC? We got to wrap this up here because we're coming up out of time, and I really wanted to get to some demands and a way forward. Perhaps we'll wrap this up in the next 5-6 minutes or so. But who hacked the DNC? The U.S. government, via the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, just released a joint statement explaining the alleged details and proof that the Russians were behind the hacks. And this report, like the reports and statements that came before, proved nothing at all. They only succeed in furthering the rumors and propaganda against Russia and the narrative that the Russians were behind the moderate expose of Clinton's treachery. So the report, it claims to produce the details, but it doesn't do anything but provide a more in-depth story to be heaped upon the skeleton which the intelligence community produced a few weeks ago. The report is full of technical jargon. You can read it online, but the basics of the claims remain the same, that the Russians, via hacking groups APT28 and APT29, hacked into the DNC emails and then colluded with WikiLeaks, which of course the media is trying to present as being an agent of Russia, to destroy the power of the Democratic Party and the reputation of Hillary Clinton before the election to make sure Donald Trump would be president. So that's the story. The report had already been debunked before it was ever published, though. 2 weeks ago, there was a mostly excellent article by Sam Biddle of The Intercept. It's despite his bizarre accusations that WikiLeaks is a conspiracy-prone organization, etc., the proof being produced regarding the alleged Russian hacking was completely demolished. So you should definitely check out Biddle's article. It was truly a good one. It's called "Here's the Public Evidence Russia Hacked the DNC. It's Not Enough." It's for The Intercept. So please go check that out. Now, what's the evidence that the Clintonistas have here? Right? It's, what do they have? Detailing how the attack was perpetrated. That's one of them. Possibly the language of the perpetrators. We have that. Let's see if we can get into some of the specifics here. We have CrowdStrike, which is citing findings of Russian responsibility. CrowdStrike is a private security firm that is saying that it has evidence that the Russians were involved. Well, CrowdStrike is on contract for the Democratic National Committee. It contracted its services in June. It's very unusual to admit evidence of a crime which is assembled on the dime of the victim, right? If we're going to blame the Russian government for disrupting the presidential election, you better be damn sure that this is real evidence. So what do they have? Either comes from private security firms, CrowdStrike, FireEye, that's another one, and these guys are on the bankroll of the DNC. They've got contracts out. Independent researchers, they have some with university affiliations and credentials, but a lot of them are just guys on Twitter, not credible. This is even by their standards. Some of these private security firms had proprietary access to DNC computers, but the evidence is much of it's been drawn from publicly available data, like the emails and the documents themselves, not from the actual computers. So what they're saying, this is what they've got. The attacker or attackers registered a deliberately misspelled domain name used for email phishing attacks against DNC employees, which was connected to an IP address associated with the APT28 Fancy Bear group. Malware on the DNC computers was programmed to communicate with an IP address associated with with those groups. The metadata in a file that was leaked by Guccifer 2.0 shows it was modified by a user was writing in Cyrillic. Felix Edmundovich, which was a reference to a Soviet-era police force. Of course, there's Russian language settings on the metadata. the Guccifer 2.0, he claims to be Romanian, but a lot of people think that he's actually Russian. DCleaks.com domain was registered by a person using the same email service as the person who registered a misspelled domain used to send phishing emails to DNC employees. Some of the phishing emails were sent using Yandex, which is the Russian version of Google, basically. And then a bit.ly link believed to have been used by APT28 Fancy Bear in the past was also used against Podesta. Now, this is what they've got. CrowdStrike says that the Russians, that this group, AP228 Fancy Bear, is known for its technique of registering domains that closely resemble domains of legitimate organizations they plan to target. Well, no shit. Most hackers are, right? This is not a Russian technique. It's like saying that using a computer is characteristic of Russian hackers. Yeah, well, it's characteristic of all hackers. Yandex, again, the Russian equivalent of Google. Is that supposed to be a giveaway of something? Are we going to say that any hacker that uses Google is a CIA agent? That would be laughed out of the park and laughed off the internet. It should be laughed off when we talk about this here. And the idea that Guccifer 2.0 pretended to be Romanian, but he's actually Russian, that doesn't prove he works for the Russian government. It doesn't even really prove anything. It might make him a liar, but it doesn't prove anything. So this is what CrowdStrike says. They say, I won't go through all of this because we're running out of time, but they talk about APT28, and they say that their tradecraft is superb, operational security second to none, and the extensive usage of living off the land techniques enables them to easily bypass many security solutions they encounter. Basically, they're saying they're able to, they're sort of mobile, they're able to go back into the environment, change out their implants, modify their persistent methods, move on to new command and control channels, etc. But how did CrowdStrike figure out that it was APT28 and 29? It's because they were sloppy. It's because they left Cyrillic comments on the documents. Well, I thought they went back and they changed their implants and modified persistent methods. I thought they were mobile. How are they? I thought they were second to none. But yet they accidentally left their Cyrillic stamp on these emails. What about the question of the Edmundovich reference, the Soviet-era police force? If they're second to none, are we really supposed to believe that these guys would use such an obvious moniker to do that? This is absolutely crazy. Now they're also saying, we've got CrowdStrike co-founder Dmitry Alperovich saying that APT28 closely mirrors the strategic interest of the Russian government. Well, not really, actually. What they did when they looked at the study was they looked at all of the hacking targets of this group that were the same as the Russian government. They even admitted in the report that they eliminated all of the other possibilities because it's gone after a wide variety of things. It's not that APT28 has a narrow focus on American political targets. It's actually not the case. They have a lot of different targets, but they don't talk about them. They admitted that they're not going to even look at them. They say, APT28 has targeted a variety of organizations that fall outside of the three themes we highlighted above. However, we are not profiling all of APT28's targets with the same detail because they are not particularly indicative of a specific sponsor's interest. That is the very definition of a confirmation bias. That is the very definition of it. So this is linking APT28. Let's say they did do the hacking. Means nothing. There is no link to the Russian government here. The argument that Guccifer 2.0 is an agent of the government, that is based on the fact that APT28 is a Russian agent, and that is in no way proven. security researcher Claudio Guarnieri, they asked him what would be actual proof that the Russians were involved in this, and he quite frankly said communication. They need to see communication from the Russians, from Russian intelligence, etc., with these groups. So it's all hype. That's all it is. Remember, in 2014, we had the Department of Justice indicting hackers, Chinese hackers, a team of them, who were hacking American trade secrets, or allegedly doing so, for the People's Liberation Army. The Department of Justice alone released a 56-page indictment of these hackers. What do we have from the entire intelligence community regarding these hacks? Nothing. Supposition, rumors, that's it. So what's the proof? All you need for the proof is documented evidence, verifiable evidence, intercepts of Russian officials talking about this in some way. Now, WikiLeaks is on the radar of the United States intelligence agencies, right? They hate WikiLeaks. They're already under surveillance, obviously. So this, if they're talking with WikiLeaks and the Russians are talking back and forth with WikiLeaks, they should have this evidence documented. For its part, WikiLeaks has denied that Russia was the source of the information. They said it clearly that the Russian government was not the source of these emails. WikiLeaks is not protecting Russia. Again, the media will say they've released all this stuff on the U.S. government, but they haven't released anything on Russia. Well, it's not true. There's 800,000 documents related to Russia on WikiLeaks. All you got to do is go in there, type it in the search term. Want to mention a couple of other things. Hillary says that there's 17 agencies in the intelligence community that back her up that the Russians were responsible for this. To quote Donald Trump, wrong, there are not. There is one. There is the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which, in her defense, is supposed to be the organization that speaks for all of the rest of the organizations, which says that the Russians were involved. But this is really what we've just deconstructed here. It's just typical Clinton spin. Now, the Washington's blog website reached out to Bill Binney, who was the NSA executive who created the agency's mass surveillance program for digital information. They asked him about this this report, and he said he was highly critical. And he said basically what I just said about WikiLeaks. Show us the evidence. It should be easy. You've already got these guys under surveillance. Anyway, so what we're seeing is just yet another attempt to provoke conflict abroad and then upheaval here at home on the basis of the intelligence community simply saying to the American public to trust us. This is the same intelligence community which claimed there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. 13 years later, I'd say it's not a good idea to give them the benefit of the doubt. And once again, we're given no evidence. We've only been given vague, unproven allegations to justify actions that very well may be destructive not only to the American people, but to the people of the world if they want to continue to push this. All we need, I guess, is for Colin Powell to give a PowerPoint presentation in front of the United Nations, and the circle will be complete. Now, I really wanted to get into our way forward here in 2017, but perhaps it's even better that we wait until next week because, of course, the Obama administration will still be in office. We want to look forward since we're going to get a new administration, a new Senate, a new House. We're not optimistic about that, but we have to come up with a plan, which we have. We have our set of demands, and this is what we're going to argue and fight for. So, ladies and gentlemen, next week we'll talk about that, the plan forward, and please tune in next week so we can get that very important topic out to everybody. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week. They told us to pack up our bags and head south. They said that the luck of the Irish ran out. They told us they burned down our farms and our stores. They cursed us. You are listening to UCY.tv. Why don't you stick around for more awesome